Welcome back to WebCertain TV. I'm Gemma Houghton. Today I'm here with Ian Davidson, who is a food and beverage specialist who's recently returned to the UK after spending 30 years working in the industry in Asia. And today he's going to tell us more about what he's learned from being there and how we as Western businesses can effectively target markets in that region. Hi Ian, thanks for being here.
Good morning.
So, to start with, we know that there's a lot of opportunity in Asia, a lot of businesses are starting to, or already very active there, but what do you think are the biggest misconceptions or mistakes made by businesses targeting that region?
Yes, I think perhaps the first and most important point is that there is no homogeneity in Asia. Asia is a massive geographical entity with, 48 countries, I believe, hugely differing levels of economic development, political development. So Asia has to be treated not as one entity, but it's effectively as many different countries, each with varying levels of development.
And then from the perspective of the opportunity that brings, which countries do you think are the most interesting at the moment or the most appealing for businesses to try out?
Yes, I think first of all, it depends really what business you are in, whether it's food and beverage, whether it's IT, whether it's some other form of industrial or consumer goods. Of course, you have very highly developed countries like Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, which may appear in some areas a little bit Western to us, but actually underneath are not. That's a mistake that many people can make. They look at the country and say, this looks very familiar, but actually underneath it's not. It's very different, it has its own habits, customs, traditions. So in terms of level of development, I would sort of say Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore. But if you're looking for large markets which are still developing with huge potential, then of course everybody now looks towards China and India. Both these countries are so vast, so massive, with huge populations, that if you do choose to target this country or these countries, you need to go for geographical areas within the country. You can't say, I'm going to sell my product to India, to China. You say, okay, I think I want to target Beijing, I want to target Shanghai, I want to target Guangzhou. You have to basically take almost a city by city approach. Of course, having done your research beforehand.
To see which ones have got the most potential. And obviously, you mentioned there that they're all very different. They've all got their very own differences between each other and also obviously between other countries around the world, just like any country. So when it comes to localization, how much needs to be adapted and localized for those different markets, and what are the key differences maybe between West and East, if there are any general?
I think first and foremost, what might work in your own country or your own market is probably not going to work in the same way in any one of the Asian markets that you choose to target. There are so many things like packaging, things like pricing, things like sort of whether those markets already have a similar product that's produced domestically. Because one thing that we must remember is that when we target these markets with effectively what would be an imported product, that product may already be available in the market in countries like Japan, like China, even India to some extent. The domestic or home industry is extremely strong, and of course you have to be able to tailor-make your product in such a way that it's going to appeal above and beyond what's available domestically.
Yeah, so really look into what value you can add and what extra you can bring to those markets.
And just to come back to your earlier point, really to stand any chance of success, it doesn't really matter what sort of product you're selling. You need to have some form of local partnership. The chances of success if you go in on your own to these huge markets with their own products, their own traditions, their own ways of doing business, their own unique ways of distribution, you're probably going to fail very quickly. So difficult as it is, one needs to seek out a local partner who has an interest in your business, who knows how things work in that country, and who is as keen as you are yourself to make sure that your product is a success.
And where would you start with that? If you don't know a market, obviously, how would you where can you go to find potential partners?
I mean, I'm not an expert in that respect, but generally, most, for example, British embassies have a commercial department, and they specialise in exactly that. Right. They will help you to find potential partners. After that, you're basically on your own. But they can actually help with introductions, yeah. And then of course you have to sort of work from there. Usually, first and foremost, and this goes for any country in Asia, building the relationship, yeah. And that is something which takes time, takes patience. But in countries such as Japan, which I've had much personal experience, it can be weeks or months before any real business can be concluded. Because your potential partner wants to get to know you, wants to get to know your product, wants to really understand you as a person and your product, yeah. Before they'll even place the first order or before, yeah. Business will really start. And this, yeah. Is something so
they want to know that you're the right person to work with them and that they think they can work together.
That's right. And obviously in the West we're often under pressure to hit targets, hit objectives quickly. But you really have to go into these new markets with time and patience.
A long-term plan.
That's a good point. Yes, but basically with medium-stroke long-term plans. Yeah. Don't look for short-term gains at all.
Yeah, you're not gonna get them. Yeah. And do you have any examples of businesses that you've seen that have either done particularly well or badly in Asia because they haven't, in Asian markets because of that?
I mean, I don't like to sort of quote specific names, but I suppose perhaps one name which we all know and which has been very successful is Apple in China. Apple has created an aspirational product which the Chinese will pay a huge premium for. It's been very successful. There are some companies which we know that have gone into Asia, didn't do so well, but realized their mistakes and were able to sort of improve upon their business model. I mean, eBay is one example. eBay went into Japan in the early 2000s and realized after 2-3 years that basically business was not working. Why? Because they got their invoicing and billing system wrong. They didn't research that properly.
Yeah. It's all the details that
yes,
come together.
and then, for example, in the industry which I worked for so long, in food and beverage, or should we say probably more beverage, something as simple as a bottle size, we might not give it much thought, but I saw companies, including my own, introduce a range extension or a new product. The outer carton was not right, or the bottle size was not right. Simple things like that can be the difference between success and failure without proper research.
Yeah, so it always goes back to the same thing. Do your research, make sure you understand before you even start.
I think that's the key. Before you even get on an airplane, make sure that you've done your research. If it's a larger market like China or India, as I said earlier, make sure that you have an idea of which geographical area you want to target and why.
And then we can't really talk about Asia without talking about China, because it is such a huge market and it's just grown so much over the past few years. What are the key bits of advice specifically for that market? Because there's so many businesses that really do want a piece of the Chinese e-commerce or business.
I think there are 2 or 3 points. One is remember that this country, no matter what product area, probably has its own products. Local distribution, local products are very, very strong. So you've got to have a product which is differing from a local product, which has some appeal and is at the right price point. So you have to have something that is distinguishing from local product. You have to bear in mind something which is often overlooked. Household names like Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter are either banned in China or very, very heavily restricted. So you need to tailor-make your marketing campaigns to appeal to Chinese consumers. You need to make sure that in your SEO, you actually have your product or your website that is traceable or through Baidu, which is basically the Chinese equivalent of Google. You have to bear in mind that legal rules and regulations are quite complex. And again, this brings you back to local partner. You need your local partner to find a way through these local rules and regulations.
Quite a lot of restrictions, even just setting up a business, aren't
a lot, yes. And also, unlike in the West, rules and regulations are always changing, and you need to be able to keep up with those changes.
Yeah, which is again why you need those local partners.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned you spent quite a lot of time in Japan, and that's again another very well developed Asian market, but very different to China. What are the specifics about that market that may be interesting or notable?
Well, I mean, Japan is such a huge and diverse country in itself that, I mean, initially it may seem a little bit Western, especially cities like Tokyo and Osaka, but underneath, the Japanese remain very traditional in the way they do business, very, very sort of long, deep-rooted customs. Similar to China, they have a very, very strong domestic industry, regardless of what product it is. I think one of the areas which really stood out for me all the time I was there, maybe changing a little bit, was the very, very high expectations regarding product quality. Now, be that a food, be that a beverage, be that an industrial goods, it doesn't really matter what, but the standards of the expectation of high standards is very, very strong. And your product must be absolutely excellent and faultless, otherwise the Japanese won't be interested. There are some, in the last 10, 15 years, there have been a number of sort of changes in the way consumers behave. In the late 80s and early 90s, during the boom years, I mean, there was a massive market for luxury goods. No such thing as a discount store. That has all changed. Now, especially younger Japanese, they seek out bargains. They spend time shopping. They look for the best price. And unlike their sort of parents and grandparents, they probably don't have lifetime employment guaranteed either. So they're a lot more cautious. That aside, the expectation of quality, even if they go to bargain or discount stores, is still there. I mean, I use the word. I mean, there is a Japanese expression, but basically it's perfectionism. It's the most perfect. Well, perfectionism is extremely strong.
And how important do you think it is to spend time in the country that you maybe want to target in order to really understand it, or can you manage through Skype calls and research at your desk?
I think if you have a local partner who is able to market and sell your product, and you have a good working relationship with that partner, then you may not need to be there so often once the business is established and running. But I think in the initial 6 months, initial year, depending on how long it may take, it's very important to be in the market, build that relationship, I guess understand the market, make sure that the results of any research you've done is actually correct. But yes, I mean, you, in the immediate short term, you would need to be in that market very, very frequently.
In order to build those relationships.
That's right. That's correct. Yes. Yeah.
So, would you have any final kind of top tips or main tips that you would say, the key takeaway for people who are, currently looking into Asian markets?
I think first and foremost, do your research. There are multiple means of doing your research, whether it's just via the internet, whether it's via the embassies overseas, which have commercial departments. But before you even think about selling your product, which country in Asia is it? If it's the larger countries, which cities do you want to sell to? make sure that you do select the right local partner, which first time round might not be successful, but make sure you do get that right business partner in the market that you're targeting. Be patient. Don't go for short-term gains, and basically work on those relationships, I think.
Yeah, so it's really also quite important to probably not think, let's try and get into 10 Asian countries this year.
Yes,
Pick one or maybe two, but really focus on those and get them right first.
And if you have the time or the interest, and a little bit of this comes from personal experience, try to learn some of the language, because your foreign counterpart will always receive you warmly if they can see that you've actually made the effort to learn some of their language.
Yeah, and then you care a little bit more about just the money that you're getting from your sales.
It's demonstrating the interest, not just in selling the product, but the interest in your partners and the interest in the country.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Well, a lot of useful tips and advice there, Ian. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.